Hi, this is StrategyCast, where smart marketers and bold business thinkers share the plays behind brand breakthroughs. I'm Lori Jones, President and CEO of Avocet Communications. If you've ever landed a new marketing role and felt the pressure to prove yourself fast, this episode is for you. Today, we're breaking down what really matters in your first 30, 60, and 90 days, how to run a smart listening tour, what questions uncover the truth behind the business, and how to separate quick fixes from long-term strategy. You'll learn how to evaluate what already exists, spot gaps others miss, and turn scattered opinions into clear, confident marketing roadmaps that earns leadership's trust. My guest today is Alisha Rappaport. She has stepped into brand new roles, legacy organizations, and complex stakeholder environments, and she brings a disciplined, business-first approach to marketing strategy. She's known for asking the right questions early, so strategy doesn't fail later.
A competitive edge starts with strategy, and strategy starts with knowing how to develop one. StrategyCast is a leading marketing podcast that serves up strategic insights, trends, and tips to help separate your business from the pack. Tune in weekly as host Lori Jones interviews bold marketing leaders who have priceless wisdom and are willing to share. Each episode explores cutting-edge approaches that have proven instrumental in transforming brands into industry trailblazers.
Welcome to the show, Alisha.
Thank you, Lori, so much for having me.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited to dive into this topic. You've got an incredible background that is so worthy of what we're going to be diving into in a minute. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I have an interesting background. My career started in healthcare, where I worked with pediatric patients. My goal was to really create a child-friendly environment for pediatric patients in a community hospital. And so I did all my own kind of marketing and fundraising, and I built the program from a one-person program to a 50-person program, which included volunteers and interns from undergraduate and graduate institutions within the New York metro area. And then from there, I ended up actually going and starting my own boutique marketing firm, ASR Creative Group. And I worked with many different folks from startups, women-owned businesses to kind of mid-sized businesses, 100 people plus, and was the outsourced marketing firm for them, building brand new brands from the startups to kind of growing the brands that exist. And also some of them were getting ready for acquisition.
Right.
So it was part of that kind of transition and prepping them for that changeover.
Yeah.
And while I was a contractor, while I had my own marketing firm, I actually started as a contractor at S&P Global, covering a maternity leave. And then 6 years later, there I am. I was asked to stay on permanently. I worked within their ESG team, which was developing the Sustainable One function. And then from that, I ended my tenure at S&P in the credit and risk space. And then recently took on a new role at Fitch Group for, it's a brand new role actually for Fitch Group in general for being the head of podcast content strategy and publicity to really up the game and add some more of my insights into their content strategy.
And here you are today, living the dream right along with that new role. Yeah. So when you look back at these incredible experiences and how you approach, even in your new role, what you're going to be working on, what was it? What was the epiphany that really said, okay, we can go at this too quickly. We better just take a seat back, take a breath, evaluate, and then move forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think partially because this was a brand new role. So I was starting from kind of a clean slate. So it's, have the ability to kind of craft the direction I want to go in. I think for me, whenever I approach anything that's in a new situation, whether it was when I was in my business, it was a new client, I think the biggest thing is really taking a step back and doing your due diligence,
Right.
what it is that you already have that exists, what works, what could we do better, looking at the overall strategy on how we're going to approach it. I think I usually try to start on a listening tour, as I say,
Yeah.
and that's really spending time with really any stakeholders that would be involved with the role that I would be in, and getting feedback and their insights, and kind of taking all that information in to develop kind of an approach strategy,
And
and how I'm going to tackle it.
Yeah, and we're going to dive into that in a little bit here. Alicia and I have worked on 5 very, very clear components that all of you are going to want to get your notebook out on and take some notes on today, because these are really important. They're going to set, even if you are in a current role, it's good to listen to this and just reaffirm that you're approaching each new plan each year with the right approach, a new product launch with the right approach. So get your notepads out, friends. Okay, the first one that we're going to talk about is really that day one reality check. Why most marketing strategies fail early. When marketers step into a new role, what do you see that they're getting wrong in the first 30 days?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, a lot of times as marketers, we're super excited and we want to jump in and start kind of making changes. Sometimes over-promising on things because they're excited and they're new, and then making promises to stakeholders that you don't really understand the full scope of what you're going to be doing. And I think those are some of the things that we get, and it's the excitement and the energy that you want to bring. But I think those are some of the things that potentially can go awry within the first 30 days.
And there's a real interesting mental side to this, I think, as a new leader. And what we see quite often is change for change's sake.
Yeah.
Change does not need to take place. And a lot of that, I think, happens with people just rolling up their sleeves and wanting to establish their authority or their position within the organization. And back to the point that you just mentioned, really what they need to be doing is listening. Why do you think it's so tempting to jump right into execution, which we see quite often as well, versus really the high-level strategy that needs to be the driving force behind that?
Yeah, I think, people want to prove themselves, right? Any of us that we're in a new role, they chose us for this role. And so we want to prove ourselves and really, and we want to show something concrete right when we get started. And so I think that's part of it. I think that we want to also, people want to showcase their value and what they bring to the table. So I think that's part of the reason why folks they want something tangible that they can say, oh, look, I did this.
Yeah.
So I think that's a lot of that.
The second phase that we're going to talk about, and you touched on it briefly, is the listening tour. We love listening tours. I think that is where we can really hone in on what is working, what's not, but the nuances, the innuendos, and really have respect for what people have done before us and gain the insight that is important and the intelligence gathering there as well, which really helps us determine, are we on or off strategy? So you've obviously talked about the listening tour. What does that look like in practice?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it looks like really just meeting a variety of relevant stakeholders. And that can be anybody from on the senior level to folks that are the people that are actually doing, all the intricacy works, whether it's the multimedia team or it's the content team, or marketers within other areas. I think it's really looking at meeting all these variety of stakeholders and then asking them to really be transparent around what it is that they want to share. Because I think sometimes people are a little bit more cautious about what they're sharing to someone new, but I think the more transparency that people can be to that new person actually, I think, is the most beneficial. I think getting feedback around existing, speakers, existing marketers, being able to take that information overall and then kind of putting it into a strategy, I think is the best way to go about it. It's really important for people to try to be as transparent as possible. It's
I
not
agree.
really so easy, but I think that is super helpful to anybody coming into a new role.
Yeah. I think it's interesting to take a look at the very non-obvious folks as well, such as office managers,
Yeah.
admin assistants, uh, those support roles, because they know more about what's happening in the office than most people ever do. And I think there's a lot to gain, and let alone establishing rapport with them, I think is the way to build a great cultural fit as well.
Yeah, 100%, because believe it or not, those admins or, you know, building services people,
Yeah.
things like that, those are the people that are like so key in being able to get things done and where to direct you. I know the big thing for me in my roles is, especially as marketers, is like also looking at the partnership between sales, product, customer success,
Right.
app developers, account managers, the digital teams, and clients. It's truly marketers have to have those partnerships in order to be able to really understand the business and what it is that they're marketing.
Yeah.
I think you need those partners because they give you insights and then they give you a lot of support. And I do feel like that partnership between sales and marketing is very much entwined.
Yeah. I
So
agree.
those are things that you should definitely continue to listen to those folks.
How do you filter signal, like something that's really important here, from just noise?
I think it's just, well, sometimes it's just your own intuition, on things. I think it's taking, when you're doing all this due diligence, it's really looking at everything that you have there and kind of pulling out what you think's the most relevant. And usually, obviously, as someone who's new in a role, you have fresh eyes. So you can see things sometimes that others don't. So I think it's just when you're gathering all that information, look at what's the most valuable, and then obviously use your own expertise in those situations. Like, what have you done in other roles that,
Right.
will add to what we're trying to do here. And I think also like keeping it to a smaller group of people. Sometimes when you're getting to that strategy, sometimes too many people can make it very overwhelming and more confusing. So I think it's really looking at who do you want to be those key folks and their opinions within that.
Yeah. The ones that, I think in our roles that are strategic thinkers as well, and versus, the execution piece of it. I think that really helps too, because all too often, we're really trying to get our hands around what the strategy is, the strategies. We've got maybe a business strategy going into this,
Mhm.
and we need to be able to take that information and really make sure that the marketing strategy is where it needs to go to
Yeah.
still be able to really filter out who are those strategic thinkers versus those who just execute, I think is really important. So
Yeah.
after all this, the next thing we're going to do is really take inventory, which you just touched on. And once you've listened to everyone, how do you assess what really does exist to know whether or not it's of value or not?
I think it's when you're taking everything that's existing and looking at it. Sometimes I try to like put things in buckets, like meaning, okay, this is on the, creative side, or this is part of like the overall roadmap, and just making sure you're kind of looking at them from different buckets to see where all this existing content is. If there is overlap, can we condense? How do we differentiate between certain things? And then obviously wanting to be able to have the ability to like shift things into different buckets. Maybe there's stuff that we can use in different places.
Yeah.
So I think that's important. And obviously, you know, see what you also have to throw spaghetti at the wall, right?
Yeah.
See what sticks. And that's the thing. I think you just always have to be able to take the risk to try something. And if it doesn't work, then but you never know. It could be fantastic. And you might have missed that opportunity. So I think that's another piece of it.
Have you ever found something that you thought, why in the world are we doing it this way? Like, it was such a shock of a find.
Yeah. I mean, I think throughout my career, there's been a lot of those things. I think sometimes people that when folks are in a role for a long time, or they've been in roles for a long time, they get kind of stagnant, and, they're not necessarily always like looking at like, let's try new things. So I think, that's where I think we can make things better, is try to look for other ways to do things. It's
And
tricky
how
sometimes,
it is
but
it is tricky
yeah.
because you've got peers that are working on that. How do you bring everyone along when a major change does need to take place without alienating them?
I think having everybody be included in like part of the process is
Right.
how try not to alienate. I mean, unfortunately, I think there's always going to be people that are not going to be so thrilled about the change, but I think it's also like what's best for the business. And what are the goals of the business? And those are really how I focus things. It's not a personal thing. It's more about like what we're all here to like grow the company. How do
Yeah.
we do that? And I think if people feel like they have a role, some role in that, I think that also helps them to get on board more because they feel like they're valued.
Yeah. And I think once you have all these data sets and these interviews and, an assessment of what's been done, then you can really understand what exists. And that's really where the strategy work does begin. And there's probably a category in there that's what's to continue, what's to fix, let's not to worry, what are we not going to worry about right now?
Yeah.
Which really leads us into our fourth segment here, which is Band-Aids versus surgery, and prioritizing what really matters. How do you determine and decide what needs an immediate fix versus a long-term, we'll worry about it later?
I think, I try to look at the low hanging fruit. What are small changes that we could make immediately without complete, array? Whether it's, for example, if you're doing a podcast, maybe just changing some aesthetics in the set, maybe getting different lighting, just certain things that you can make these small tweaks that don't cost money, because that's always usually a big thing within the marketing realm, and that they're very subtle enough, but like we do have an improvement. That can potentially even be the way that you market things. Maybe you're only marketing in one or two channels, and then we say, okay, let's try all these channels and see how it does. And those are ways to kind of fix it in the short term as you're working towards those long-term goals.
Yeah.
And part of the overall strategy, even that should be part of your overall strategy.
Right. One area that we get involved in right away, when we get hired as an agency, quite often what we're doing is running two parallel tracks because we still need to show movement with the work that needs to be done. So we've got a strategy track that is moving along the way. But then what we do is, what are the immediate needs that the commercial team might need, that the sales team might need? So what's high impact and low effort that we can get done right away?
Right.
And I think that really helps show movement while the strategy framework's really being built behind it, knowing that there might be edits downstream with what we're doing there, but at least we're, helping the team move along.
Yeah. And then the folks that are kind of on that senior leadership level see some improvement, so they feel like something's happening.
Exactly.
So I think that's important.
Yeah. Those quick wins is what we refer to them as. I think make a lot of sense for people.
Yeah.
So we've got all the insight. We're establishing leadership and, with the new position and ultimately existing leaders as well. And that in itself, I think, is very, very strong strategy. So let's turn all of this due diligence into real marketing strategy now.
Yeah.
How do you synthesize everything that you've learned into a clear strategy?
Usually what I do is look at how, how we want to approach everything. And I think making sure that we have that kind of, like you said, the low impact stuff to the short term to the long term. I think taking everything together and really having a, like, kind of almost mapping it out, putting a timeline around it, I think is super helpful. And when you're trying to put together a strategy, it's almost like you want to put phases on that.
Yeah.
And so that way you kind of say, okay, I'm going to start in this phase. We're going to do that. And I think it also helps with aspect of change for existing stakeholders. Sometimes it's like if you know things are happening in a phase process, then you can kind of you can manage it better.
Right.
So I think that's important, and I think the more that you prove the value, the more on board folks are going to be. And so whenever I'm developing that strategy, it's like what it is now is also part of it. Where do we want to be? And
Right.
how do, and how we see this, the impact, what's the impact? What's the KPIs around it? And I think that's what should also be kind of part of your strategy as you're building it out within these different phases, how you're going to get to certain aspects at certain times.
So speaking about phases, how much time do you give yourself for phases 1 through 4? Is it 30 days, which sounds very, very short to me, 60, 90?
Usually, especially now, obviously in this role, I'm kind of looking at it as a 30, 60, 90.
Yeah.
And so, the first 30 was that due diligence component. And then the 60 is more of kind of now really putting that strategy on paper and having those conversations about what that looks like. And then within the 90 days, there's a complete strategy developed, and we're already kind of starting to take some of those initial steps. I think, for me, I always put a timeline on stuff, so that way it helps me kind of stay on target. But that's usually where I go. And then once you kind of get to that 90 days, within that strategy, you have the next, 6 to 12 months too. So then you're like, I'm going to get to this point. But then once I'm at that point and I actually like implementing the strategy, that's when you kind of switch to those 60, 3 months, 6 months, and then kind of look at what that will look like for the rest of the time frame.
Yeah, that's great. Credibility is key here. There's no doubt about it. And I think all of these steps really lead to establishing credibility and not making knee-jerk reactions about what is and what should be, and going into this with no preconceived notions as well, which I think is a big mistake a lot of marketers make.
Yeah.
How do you make the strategy feel very, very credible to the executive team?
It's a good question. I think it's making sure that you're really understanding what they are looking for in the role that you're filling, and what their expectations are. I think, and for them also, it's the return on investment too.
Right.
We're putting all this money into, whether it's personnel or into the marketing efforts overall. What's the goal? What are we going to get out of that? And I think that's the biggest thing with the executive level folks, is being able to kind of map out those KPIs, and then being able to either hit them and exceed them. I think the one thing that I would definitely always recommend to people is when you're setting goals, make sure they're very realistic.
Right.
It's almost, for me, it's better to either meet or exceed than under produce. And I think that's one thing that sometimes we get as marketers, potentially a little overzealous in the way that we're doing our KPIs. So I think one bit of advice I would always say is make sure you're realistic about what you think you can do.
Well, and I think the thing that's very, very difficult there is this: quite often the business goals that a board sets, especially in the early stage companies who, it could even be a Series A, or they're just going through some sort of investment from an acquisition standpoint.
Yeah.
But quite often, fast growth is so important that the growth goals in relationship to the budget that they've got set for marketing, there's no way they're going to meet the goal.
No.
So how often do you uncover that in your own experience? And then what advice do you have for our listeners today on what signals they should be looking at to be able to uncover that sort of miscue?
Yeah, I think it's making sure you're doing a really good job as far as looking at what things are going to cost.
Right.
I've had actually a few of these experiences where I was anticipating X budget and I had much less.
Yeah.
And so I had to kind of think outside the box and be more scrappy. But I also had to go back and reevaluate some of the goals based on that. Because
Right.
if you don't have the funding to support what you're doing, and that's really understanding, and that's also looking at what are the marketing tools and aspects of what you're doing within your strategy. Are you putting more money into digital? Do you want to use a publication to help? So I think it's also looking at the things that you're investing in and whether or not you think that those are going to help pay off. But the knowing how you're going to spend that money is the key to being able to set those KPIs.
Well, I tell you, there's some real good advice there, you guys. So remember that and understand. I think the part that's difficult this is what is proven and maybe even predictable. I think predictable is a pretty scary word when it comes to marketers going into a new role until you've got, some good information and good execution under your belt.
Yeah.
But predictable is a word that's used quite often in the boardroom. We can certainly provide past experiences and insights and, the case studies on what can happen. But we're really establishing predictability for every brand for the first time out of the chute. When
Yeah.
someone is asking you about that on the board, they think it's going to work overnight. They are not taking time into consideration. They may have low awareness. What we see all too often is that marketing starts mid-funnel, not top of funnel, which just takes longer to achieve results.
Yeah.
There's a lot packed up in that statement right there, but how do you approach that? How do you approach that conversation?
I mean, I think it's being realistic. I mean, that kind of goes back to even why you do the due diligence in the first place, is
Yep.
that you don't want to overpromise something that you can't deliver on. I think it's better for you to be able to answer in a realistic manner about what you believe is happening, whether or not, and the reasons why. I think it's explaining that too.
Yeah.
It's an important piece is, we're not going to get to that from zero. This is not an F1 race. It's a marathon, so you want to be able to kind of take the time to develop all of what we want to accomplish in a way that we feel like we're going to have more success instead of rushing in and then potentially having to put Band-Aids on things.
Incredible insights today, Alisha. Thank you so much. Before we close, I want to zoom out for a minute. When a marketer steps into a new role and feels the pressure to deliver quick wins, what is the single most important piece of due diligence they should do first to avoid building the wrong strategy?
I think I feel like it's more of like doing that research
Yeah.
and understanding what it is that you're trying to accomplish and how you really think you can get there.
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest thing. I mean, and again, it goes back to what's on the low hanging fruit that you could get some quick wins to satisfy that part of what your executive board is looking for. And then they'll see that there is some success, but then they'll maybe understand more why, like, you need to take the time to do it in a way and make sure that the brand is being represented the way that the company does and you're meeting those goals.
Yeah. Incredible advice all around here. I know our listeners are going to want to reach out to you. What is the best way for them to get in touch?
They can either reach out to me on LinkedIn. I think that's probably the best way to connect with me.
That's great. And I'm on LinkedIn as well. You guys see me there quite a bit. Alisha Rappaport, thank you so much for your appearance on StrategyCast.
Thank you for having me, Lori. It's been a great discussion.
Thank you.
That's a wrap. Thanks for joining us on today's show. We hope your strategic brains are spinning with new ideas and bold inspiration that will elevate your strategies and marketing know-how.